There is a moment in the study of predator intelligence that researchers describe the same way every time it happens. Not with excitement, with something quieter than that. A specific kind of unease that comes from watching an animal and realizing that it has been watching you back. Not reacting to you, not responding to you, watching you. Building a model of your behavior the way you have been building a model of its behavior. And in some cases, getting further along in that project than you expected. Romulus is 14 months old. He weighs over 90 pounds and he is still growing. And 3 weeks ago, a researcher monitoring the northern camera feed noticed something in the movement logs that she has described, in internal communications, as difficult to explain using standard greywolf behavioral models. Romulus had been approaching the northern perimeter at intervals that corresponded precisely with the scheduled maintenance gaps in the camera coverage. Not approximately, precisely. He was not exploring the fence line, and he had been doing it for at least 2 weeks before anyone noticed. Part 1. What the baseline was supposed to look like. When Colossal Biosciences designed the behavioral monitoring program for the reserve, they worked from a well-established baseline. Greywolf behavior in captive and semi-wild environments is one of the most extensively studied fields in animal cognition research. Decades of data, thousands of documented hours, a clear and reliable picture of what a wolf raised in proximity to humans, bottle-fed from birth, and housed in a large enclosure typically does. It habituates. It learns the humans around it as non-threats within a fixed category. It develops recognition of individual people based on scent and visual profile. It maps its environment thoroughly in the first weeks of access, and then settles into patrol routes that become predictable within 2 months. And it maintains a consistent flight distance from humans, the minimum proximity it tolerates before retreating that remains relatively stable once established. This is the greywolf baseline. This is what the monitoring program was built to track and measure and compare against. Romulus and Remus did not follow the greywolf baseline, not in the ways that mattered. The habituation happened. The flight distance stabilized, higher than expected, but stable. The environmental mapping happened faster than expected and covered the full 2,000-acre reserve more systematically than the greywolf baseline predicted for animals of their age. But those were quantitative differences. Faster, more thorough, explainable within the range of normal canid variation if you were generous with the parameters. What happened at the northern perimeter was not explainable within the range of normal canid variation, and the behavioral team knew it within 24 hours of pulling them. Movement logs. Part 2. The first phase. Observation. Go back to the beginning. October 2024. Romulus and Remus are newborns being bottle-fed in a controlled facility. They cannot see much. They cannot move far, but they are already doing something that will define everything that follows. They are watching. Not in the unfocused way that newborn mammals watch, in the tracking way. Following movement, returning to faces, building the visual database of the environment around them with a consistency that the handlers noticed and logged as unusual for animals this young. Most newborn canids spend the first weeks primarily oriented toward feeding and warmth. Romulus and Remus fed efficiently and then looked around, at the handlers, at the walls, at the equipment, at the patterns of movement in the space they occupied. At 8 weeks, when they were weaned and their world expanded slightly, the watching behavior expanded with it. They did not explore their new space the way domestic puppies explore a new room. They did not rush the perimeter. They stood at the center and watched it first, mapping with their eyes before committing their bodies. Building the model before testing it. The handler who noted this in the behavioral log wrote it up as an interesting observational tendency and did not escalate it. In the context of everything else they were managing, 2 wolf pups that liked to look around before moving did not register as significant. In retrospect, it was the first data point in a sequence that took 14 months to fully reveal itself. Part 3. The second phase. Avoidance with information. By 4 months, Romulus and Remus had access to a larger section of the reserve, and the behavioral team began noticing something that separated them from the greywolf baseline more clearly than anything that had come before. They were not avoiding humans randomly. They were avoiding humans directionally. A greywolf in a semi-wild enclosure with regular human presence develops a flight response that is essentially omnidirectional. Human appears, wolf moves away from human. The direction is determined by the nearest available cover or the path of least resistance. It is reactive. The human is the stimulus. The wolf is the response. Romulus and Remus were moving before the humans arrived at their location. Not dramatically before, seconds before, but consistently before, which meant they were not responding to the presence of a human. They were responding to the prediction of a presence. They had learned the movement patterns of the handlers on the reserve well enough to anticipate where a human would be before the human was there. This could still be explained within normal canid parameters. Wolves are sensitive to sound and vibration and scent at distances that make short-range anticipation possible without requiring anything unusual. The crunch of a specific gravel path, the particular sound profile of a specific handler's footsteps. These are detectable signals that a highly sensitive animal could use to predict approach without needing to model human behavior in any abstract sense. The behavioral team logged it as advanced sensory-based anticipation and moved on. Then Khaleesi was born in January 2025, and within 6 weeks of gaining reserve access, she was doing the same thing. Not learning it from Romulus and Remus through direct observation, the behavioral team checked this specifically by monitoring her behavior during periods of separation from her brothers, arriving at it independently, through the same watching behavior the males had shown at the same age. 3 animals, same behavior, independently arrived at. That was the point where advanced sensory-based anticipation started feeling like an insufficient explanation. Part 4. The third phase, individual profiling. By 8 months, the behavioral data had produced a pattern that the team found genuinely difficult to write up in neutral scientific language. Romulus and Remus were not responding to humans as a category. They were responding to specific humans as individuals. This alone is within normal wolf cognition. Wolves recognize individual humans. This is documented and expected. What was not expected was the degree of behavioral differentiation they were showing based on individual human identity. With certain handlers, their flight distance was standard. With others, it was significantly reduced. With one specific researcher who visited the reserve irregularly and had no feeding role, their flight distance was dramatically reduced to the point where she could approach within 4 meters without triggering retreat. The behavioral team investigated what was different about this researcher. She moved slowly. She avoided direct eye contact. She changed her route through the reserve frequently and unpredictably. She did not follow patterns. Romulus and Remus had identified the human who was hardest to predict and given her a different behavioral category from every other human on the reserve. Not because she was less threatening physically, because she was informationally less useful. You cannot build a predictive model of someone who does not follow patterns, and an animal that is building predictive models of the humans around it will treat the unpredictable human differently from the predictable ones. This is not standard canid behavior. This is not in the greywolf baseline at any age, and Romulus and Remus were 8 months old. Part 5. The cameras. Here is the sequence that produced the internal communication describing the movement data as difficult to explain. The northern camera tower on the reserve runs a standard maintenance cycle. Every 72 hours, a technician performs a 15-minute physical check that requires taking the camera offline. The schedule is fixed. It does not vary, and it is not announced to the animals on the reserve in any way that the behavioral team could identify. Between weeks 6 and 8 of Romulus and Remus having full reserve access, the movement logs showed Romulus approaching the northern perimeter fence within a 20-minute window of the camera maintenance cycle on 4 separate occasions. Each approach lasted between 8 and 14 minutes. Each approach ended before the camera came back online. He did not approach the northern perimeter at any other time during those 2 weeks. The behavioral team's first response was to look for the sensory signal. What could he be detecting that correlated with the maintenance cycle? The technician's vehicle? Specific sounds from the camera equipment going offline? A change in the electromagnetic field of the monitoring system? They found nothing definitive. The technician approached from a direction downwind of Romulus's position during 2 of the 4 approaches. The camera equipment produced no detectable acoustic change when going offline that their instruments could measure. The electromagnetic change was below the threshold of any documented canid sensory sensitivity. The most parsimonious explanation available to them, the one that required the fewest assumptions, was that Romulus had learned the maintenance schedule by observing its effects on human behavior over time. That he had noticed the pattern of what humans did differently in the hours surrounding the maintenance window and reverse-engineered the schedule from those behavioral cues. And that he was using the schedule not to escape. The fence is 10 feet tall and zoo-grade and has never been tested, but to approach the perimeter without being watched. He was not trying to get out, he was practicing being unwatched. And the distinction between those two things is the most important sentence in this entire video. Part 6, the climax. Anticipatory behavior. 3 weeks ago, the behavioral team has been running a modified monitoring protocol since the Northern Perimeter incident. Increased camera redundancy, overlapping coverage zones, randomized check schedules replacing the fixed maintenance cycle. Romulus has not approached the Northern Perimeter during the new protocol. He approached it twice in the first week and then stopped. He stopped on the same day the randomized schedule replaced the fixed one. He noticed the change, and he adjusted. That adjustment is the line. That specific behavioral response, detecting a change in a surveillance system and modifying behavior accordingly, is not in the greywolf baseline at any age in any study the behavioral team has been able to locate. It requires holding a model of the surveillance system in working memory, comparing the new pattern to the stored model, identifying the discrepancy, and updating behavior based on the updated model. In human cognition, this is called executive function. In animal cognition research, it is one of the markers used to identify the upper boundary of a species' cognitive ceiling. Romulus is 14 months old. He has not reached physical maturity. His brain is still developing, and he is already operating at the upper boundary of what his baseline species can do cognitively at full maturity. Khaleesi has begun approaching the eastern perimeter during the handler shift change, the 12-minute gap between the departing shift and the arriving shift when coverage on the eastern section is at its lowest. She started 3 days after Romulus stopped approaching the northern perimeter. She did not observe him do it. She arrived at the same strategy independently from a different direction. Remus has not shown perimeter behavior yet. He has instead begun positioning himself at specific points in the interior of the reserve, at times that correspond with the feeding schedule, in ways that place him between the feeding station and the access gate. Not blocking it, watching it, learning the geometry of the entry point from the inside. 3 animals, 3 different strategies, all pointed in the same direction. They are not reacting to the humans on this reserve anymore, they are modeling them. Building predictive frameworks of human behavior and testing those frameworks with systematic precision. And the frameworks are getting more accurate every week. Here's what this means and what it does not mean. It does not mean Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi are dangerous in an immediate sense. They are behind 10-foot zoo-grade fencing on a 2,000-acre monitored reserve. They are not plotting anything. They do not have goals in the human sense of that word. They are doing what predator cognition does when it is pointed at a consistent stimulus over time. It learns the stimulus. It models it. It builds predictive frameworks that make the stimulus less surprising and therefore less threatening and more manageable. They are not learning to hunt humans. They are learning what humans are, and they are doing it faster and with more precision than the greywolf baseline predicted. Because the 20 genetic edits Colossal made across 14 genes did not only target physical appearance, they targeted vocalization patterns, social behavior architecture, and potentially, though this is the part the behavioral team is most careful about stating directly, the cognitive systems that underlie social modeling in apex predators. Colossal built the body of a direwolf. They may have also built the mind of one. And the mind of a direwolf, which spent hundreds of thousands of years at the top of a food chain competing with early human hunters for the same prey in the same landscape, was built to understand what humans do before humans do it. Romulus is 14 months old. He knows your schedule. He knows which camera is offline and when. He knows which human does not follow patterns and has filed that human in a different category from every other person on the reserve. And he is still growing. still developing, still building the model. The question nobody at Colossal has answered publicly yet is a simple one. When the model is complete, what does he do with it? If watching these three animals grow into something nobody fully predicted is what keeps you watching, our previous video is where this story began. Watch Growing Up DireWolf in the 21st Century next. The first year, the bottle feeding, the handlers who could not get close, the reserve they started mapping before anyone realized what they were building. Everything that produced the animals standing at the northern fence at precisely the moment the camera went off.